All right, welcome to the Acid for Squares podcast. I'm your host, Cody Blue, Tanya Dahl.
Maybe.
And we're here with the magical Michael Mazzola. Everybody, round of applause. I like this. I do like the clapping thing. I'd like to add this to the equation if we can. Mazzola
is one of our dearest friends.
Yeah, dearest friends, partner at this company.
Angel.
Real angel of a man. Well, this is what I want to say about Mazzola. Mazzola, you know, some have said that you invented the Hollywood UFO blockbuster with your movies Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind and Unacknowledged.
Best movies ever. If you haven't seen them, please go watch them because they are masterpieces.
But here's the thing, as we gas you up, look at his cringe. And his
He always feels like...
But this is the thing. I feel like there's this, you know, this phenomenon that happens where whenever anyone is trying to push something into the mainstream culture, there's, you know, this entire force or movement like yourself for the UFO phenomenon. And once the movement goes mainstream and it finally gets taken seriously, like there's no like retrospective. Like I feel like we then need to go back to all the people who were on the forefront, who were banging the drum back when no one was.
Thank you, and I'm sorry.
Back
you know,
when
that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry you were given shit for so long.
Yeah, so we give you an award.
Here's your flowers.
Or flowers, laurels, something. You know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks to you.
What I want you, because we could talk forever, what I want you to talk today about is, we know that your journey into the UFO and UAP phenomenon was as a debunker. You got into it to debunk because you viewed it as bullshit.
Yeah. So can you take us on that journey? Because I feel like there's a lot of people out there that still even have that sort of skepticism inside of them. So seeing somebody that's a skeptic and going into making this their career is a large jump.
Yeah, so I hated all of this stuff. I hated UFOs and conspiracies and the paranormal, and I really hated spirituality and consciousness.
You hated it?
I hated it.
Why did you hate it?
Well, I'll get to that.
Okay.
I hated it too. But I didn't understand it.
I wasn't just a skeptic. I was glad that this stuff was not real. I did not want to live in a universe where this stuff was real. And I was a card-carrying member of the Skeptic Society, and Michael Shermer was like one of my heroes. And you know,
wait, who's Michael Shermer?
He's like the Skeptic Society guy. He's the most.
Wait, is there actually a Skeptic Society?
There is. There actually is. He's like carrying the torch for James Randi, you know, who I also really admired, and then people like Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins.
Are these all the Skeptic Society people?
Yeah, and like the New Atheists and these guys.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
And you know, I was a teenager when I discovered them, and I thought I was so smart and so much smarter than everybody else because I had figured out, you know, that all this stuff was bullshit. And I had other friends who were skeptics, and they would say, oh, I want to believe, but I can't because there's just not enough evidence. And I would say, why do you want to believe? I'm glad it's not real. I don't want to live in a universe where this stuff is real. I'm very happy being in a cold, dead, empty, impersonal universe that doesn't care about me.
Wow.
I'm very comfortable with that.
That's dark, Mazzola.
Yeah,
that's dark.
It was pretty dark.
No, and I get it. I used to feel the same. I used to think it was harmful for people. I'm like, you're taking your power and your, you know, accountability, and you're giving it away, and it's keeping people from changing it. You know what I mean? It's people giving away their power.
100%. I thought it was immoral to spread pseudoscience and conspiracy theories. And I thought it was honestly damaging to society to promote these ideas. And then it wasn't like one big thing that changed my mind. There was no road to Damascus moment. I didn't see a UFO in the sky and fall to my knees and say, "Oh my God, I've been wrong." It was more like death by 1,000 cuts, and I would be challenged with something, and then I would twist myself into knots, trying to debunk it. And I was really feeling challenged. It was like existential, like I was really fighting to maintain my worldview. And we have this motto. The skeptics have this motto: extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Well, when I actually honestly looked at the evidence, I realized that the evidence was there. Like there's more evidence for UFOs and all this other stuff than for most of the medicines people take. And my position totally collapsed. And then I had to ask myself, well, why is it that I not only did not believe, but I was so hostile towards it? And the answer that popped into my head in that moment was, well, if this stuff is real, you have to take responsibility for it, right? Wow. If there's a UFO cover up, I can't just keep that to myself. I have to become one of these crazy people who, is talking about this, is going to UFO conferences and trying to get the word out. Even worse, if we're living in a universe where our minds are entangled with the fabric of reality, then I'm not just a victim of circumstance, right? Like I have to take responsibility for my thoughts and for the vibration I'm putting out. And that was the thing that was the most traumatizing. So I when I look at skeptics, I have a lot of empathy for them because I realize it's not about evidence. This community has operated forever as if we could just get one more smoking gun piece of evidence, then everyone will be convinced. But that's not true because there's so much evidence. Yeah. If it was about the evidence, we'd all be on the same page. It's about the responsibility that we all have to take if this stuff is real.
That's so interesting. I've not thought about it this way.
Really? Yeah.
No, that makes sense.
So that's why I have so much empathy for skeptics, because I realize that that's really what's at stake. Mm-hmm. And so I am really committed to showing people that you can incorporate these things into your worldview, into your reality, and it'll enrich your life and make it better instead of turning you into one of these miserable, dysfunctional, crazy people, which is the stereotype. And it's a stereotype because it's true for a lot of people. When you start to interact with these ideas and these truths and a lot of this really dark stuff, especially when you're talking about government cover-ups, you can get really depressed. Yeah. And you can just see people's brains break. Right. Like with QAnon, right? And like that was just people being exposed to Jeffrey Epstein and their reality getting shattered, and then they have no discernment, right? So they get sucked into these really crazy subcultures where everything is a conspiracy.
Right.
Because, with no backing to a lot of it. Yeah.
But that's the thing is like once that wound, because it's a wound, it's a betrayal. It's sort of like a loss of innocence, and then we all know we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. So once we have that wound of betrayal, people start to see the entire everything through the filter of conspiracy, of being tricked or being deceived, and and it's like it's a fractal that you can view things through, but it is wild to see that how it can drive people crazy.
And I also don't know why I said earlier that by learning this stuff you don't feel like an obligation to tell everybody and whatever, because that's absolutely true. I don't know why. I guess I was thinking of just like UFOs and ETs and stuff, but that's actually not true too, because that's all I talk about as well. Yeah. So I'm like, there's truth out there. It has to be spread. So
well, it changes everything. It's paradigm shifting. So, okay, so you came to the other side, and then how did you get into making movies about it?
Yeah, so I always wanted to be a filmmaker. I didn't think I'd be doing this. I wanted to be Alfred Hitchcock, but the opportunity arose for me to make my first documentary, which was called Unacknowledged. And I thought I would make that. Few thousand people would see it on YouTube if I was lucky, and then I would move on with my life and get on to making real movies. But that movie blew up and changed my life, and then all of a sudden I became the UFO documentary guy, and that's what I've been doing for the last 8 years.
Can you, Please, Cody, tell the meet cute of you and
wanna hear the
Mazzola.
meet cute?
It is so great because it also, like, you guys were gonna work on a project together and everything, you know what I mean? So, like,
I'll tell her meet cute.
I wanna
but
hear the meet
feel
cute.
I'll try to tell the short version. Short version is we had an arranged marriage. We were working on the John Mack biopic, adapting John Mack into which we talked about on the
yeah,
first
we've talked
episode.
about it before, yeah.
And we hop on a Zoom call. It was during the COVID days, I believe.
It was
Hop on-
2021.
Right. And, no one is introduced on the call. And I just assumed that, you were, you were the assistant of the CEO of the company.
Because he was quiet in the background and,
Yeah.
off in his own world.
Yeah. And then I don't know. We didn't talk. I thought you were an assistant. And then we went to do a mushroom ceremony, and we begin the ceremony, and, we take the mushrooms. And so typically the way it works for me is once the medicine kicks in, there's like some initial like inventory, and it's always like the most important things. Usually it's like, so-and-so in your family needs help. Don't be an asshole in this way, call this person, like whatever. Why did you eat food before this? Things like that. But yeah, immediately it just yelled at me for pretty much was just like, you will treat him with respect. You will, this guy is like your brother. Like you will take him into the forest and you will bring him fruit and gifts and you will apologize to
You will
him
wine
for
and
not
dine this man.
acknowledging him when like it was crazy. And I was like, oh my God. I'm like, okay, I get it. Jeez, I'll hang out with him and apologize. But yeah, I mean, sure enough, I think I reached out to you to schedule a time to talk. But in that time, I was pitching to New Line Cinema to direct the Leslie Keane, Lou Elizondo movie for New Line Cinema. I think it's called Alone. And, to prep for the pitch, I threw on one of your movies because it's our favorite UFO doc. It was Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. So I threw it on sort of like the night before to kind of like brush up on my facts so I could like drop some knowledge in this meeting. And then, yeah, your name pops up, director Michael Mazzola. I was like, oh my God. So yeah,
Not the assistant.
not the assistant. So the rest is history. I mean, we went to the park. I brought you fruit and
a
gifts. I brought you gifts. And I said, hey, I'm sorry. I respect your work and I love you. And we've been friends and partners ever
How
since.
was this though when he actually showed up like this? Because I don't have heard your side of this.
I was completely overwhelmed, but in a good way, because I was just not used to being love bombed like this,
That's Cody.
And,
Sorry.
And so he's like, do you want to go first or do you want me to go first? And I'm like, you go first. I didn't know what was going on.
You brought the picnic. You go first.
So Cody, dives into all of your experience with, talking to ETs and ceremony and all of this stuff. And I'm like, oh, wow. And then he's like, so now you tell me how you got into it. And I'm like, well, I've never seen a UFO. I've never seen an ET. I've never done psychedelics. And I was kind of embarrassed. I felt like after his story, I'm just like, yeah, I've just been kind of following the evidence. And then Cody, you said, you know what, Michael, you had to chart a path for everybody else that was just based on logic and reason. Mm-hmm. And that was your role. And that really resonated with me. Yeah. And that actually really helped me make peace with the fact that I haven't had my own close encounters,
Well, so the first episode we did, we told, our story of, obviously mine was of fear around this. And being of immense fear around and trepidation around UAPs and ETs, thinking it was going to be the end of the world, coming to have this, oh wait, it's the exact opposite. It could be what will save the world, what will save us all. It became, I don't know, my fear turned into purpose.
Yeah, same.
Right. So, but I'm working in Hollywood as a director and writer. People are sending me horror movies and shit, and I'm like, and I'm pitching them doing, like movies about aliens, but like serious movies about like the real paradigm and the real truth and not sort of a caricature or so I used to say I want to take the aliens out of the genre box. I want to put them in a different genre. So I guess, so when I met you, I was like, it was like seeing, I don't know, it was like someone like I was like, you're doing it. Like my greatest fear of coming out of the closet with all this stuff with aliens and psychedelics and consciousness, you were not only making movies about it, but you are one of the few people that links consciousness to the phenomenon.
Yeah.
When me and Tanya first watched Closed Encounters of the Fifth Kind, before we were even friends, we wept because no one had made it conscious. We were like
oh my
holding
God,
hands going,
somebody
thank God,
did it.
someone's
Oh
doing
my
it.
God.
Someone, like, we were so pumped. So I mean, like,
before we knew you.
Oh wow.
So, oh wow. So
wow.
I mean, can you talk about UAPs? I hate to call them UAPs because it's some weird fucking psyop that they changed it to UAPs.
Yeah, it's fascist nomenclature, but we can use it. It's fun. It's good for the algorithm. Let's use it.
Well, I feel like you're the perfect person to say the journey from when you first came to the medium or the topic, and then watching it go mainstream, and sort of, can you explain for our listeners that are new to the phenomenon sort of the recent history of all of this?
Oh, Jesus. Okay.
Not to put too much on your plate there.
You can take it through your point of view, if it's like when you how you first looked at it and how it's changed over time.
Where to begin? Well, I came into this from the consciousness field. That was actually my first interest.
Okay.
And a lot of people, they'll get into UFOs, and then that leads to consciousness. And the spirituality, or the conspirituality field, is a term I really don't like.
I haven't heard that.
Oh yeah, it's apparently it's what I specialize in, even though I didn't know that term until recently. So you go to these UFO conferences, and everyone or watch Gaia, and everyone's talking about the Palladians and the Arcturians and the reptilians and all this stuff, and I really don't have an opinion on any of that stuff.
Same.
And I make UFO films, but if you watch my movies, there's actually very little in them about the ETs themselves and about UFOs. We spend the whole time talking about humans. What have humans done in reaction, in response to this phenomenon?
Because you can prove that.
Because we can prove that.
Right.
But also, that's really the conversation that we need to be having. So it doesn't matter, I mean, it does matter on one level, what the ETs are up to. Are they a threat? Are there different agendas, or, whatever? But we as humans have done some really fucked up shit to keep this a secret.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you watch our films, we spend the whole time talking about fascism and the military-industrial complex and media manipulation and scientific fraud and propaganda and racism, and like when we say the reptilians are evil, but the Nordics, the ones who are blonde and blue-eyed and look like us, they're the good ones. That's just racism. So there is this very essential reflection and conversation that humanity needs to have, and that's the conversation that I'm interested in. Right. It's like we have to sort out our own shit before we can even be worthy of contact with one of these advanced civilizations.
Right. Well then, so okay, your work and your films focus on highlighting the government cover-ups, right, and the scientific cover-ups and all of that. So now we enter this new paradigm, where the government has acknowledged their cover-ups and have acknowledged the billions of dollars that they've spent covering up the phenomenon. So with if past is prologue, do you view this as bullshit?
Yeah, of course. So here's what's going on. So about it. So my dear friend, who you've interviewed and who we all know and love, Daniel Sheehan, who's been in most of my movies, and he's like a living legend. He's the most legendary civil rights attorney ever. You know, he did Watergate and Pentagon Papers, and he uncovered Iran-Contra, and he represents the tribes at Standing Rock, and he's done a lot of work in UFO activism, and this is what he's dedicated the rest of his life to, right?
And now he has New Paradigm.
So he's launched the New Paradigm Institute. He represents Lou Elizondo. He represented the Disclosure Project, etc. So he's one of my best friends. And about a year ago, he you know, because we talk several times a week. About a year ago, he says, you know, I'm hearing this phrase in my conversations with these Pentagon guys, because he's always in Washington, D.C., antagonizing the people in the government to try to get them to tell the truth on this. And he told me that they're saying we have to avoid catastrophic disclosure. And my ears perked up, and I said, what's that? I've never heard of that term before. And he said, yeah, neither have I. And I said, is it what I think it is? And he said, yeah, it's basically disclosure that they cannot control, which results in the complete loss of trust in our public institutions. So they're saying we have to avoid catastrophic disclosure, and we have to, quote, preserve the elements of power.
Sounds about right.
Sounds about right. So what we're seeing right now is an attempt at a controlled disclosure. This Schumer amendment, the so-called disclosure bill that was passed in the Senate but was gutted in the House.
When was this passed?
Just a few months ago.
Oh, wow.
It actually calls for the creation of the Controlled Disclosure Campaign Plan. Yeah, exactly.
What?
That's the correct face to make when you hear that. Yes. They actually call it that, right? So, and it calls for a 7-year slow rollout of disclosure, and it calls for the creation of the Controlled Disclosure Campaign Plan Committee with, and actually Danny's Institute was asked to nominate people to sit on this committee. They wanted scientists and historians and people from different fields. But basically what this is all about is they know that they can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. There's too much momentum behind people waking up. They have to roll this out. And so they're going to roll it out in a way that maintains the status quo, right? It's going to maintain the elements of power, that's their words, and that maintains business as usual. And if you've watched my films, you know that that's totally unacceptable, because we're if you just look at the technology that they've been suppressing, you're talking about a whole new civilization where all of us would be living like immortal billionaires, right? You're talking about energy technology that would bring the cost of manufacturing and agriculture virtually to zero, right? Creating endless abundance for everybody. When you look around and you see power lines and roads and airplanes, all of this is a construct.
Right.
We should not be living in a world with any of this shit.
Every time I see telephone poles or power lines, I'm like, this makes no sense to me. First of all, why aren't these underground to begin with? But also the free energy systems they've been being suppressed for so long.
I feel like we focus on the free energy systems, but if, that would imply if their medicine is as involved as their propulsion systems, they would eradicate illness on the planet.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just the energy stuff. It's the propulsion. It's the medical stuff is insane. The ability to regrow limbs immediately. I mean, it's crazy Star Trek stuff.
It's the disillusionment of every power structure. The religious power structures would fall. So these power structures are trying to integrate this new information or this new aspect of reality that they've been essentially resisting and burying for God knows how long.
Why do you think that they're actually suppressing all of this information? Is it purely for power, or do you think there's another agenda?
I'm not a mind reader, but a major part of it is for power. We know that, right? They put it in their own documents, right? So the the 1992 Department of Defense policy planning guidance document, the first draft of it was leaked. And it said, I'm trying to remember the exact phrasing, but it said something, basically it said that, now that the Soviet Union has collapsed, we need to keep our foot on the gas of expanding the American empire. And we're going to establish full spectrum dominance over the entire planet. And it says we should be able to kill in the crib any threat to American dominance, even within the borders of other countries. And so that was leaked, and it was kind of a scandal. So they said, "Oh, no, that was just the first draft. First drafts are always
kidding.
They're always a little rough, right?" So the second draft said, "Well, no, we don't. Now we want to build a coalition, and we're going to invite Canada and France and the UK and Germany and Italy and Mexico, but specifically the white Castilian the white upper class, right, of Spanish descent." And then it says, and Russia, and Russia can join now that it has spun off its ethnic provinces, right? So
What the fuck does that mean?
I mean, it's just blatant white supremacy, right? So, so they're motivated by full spectrum dominance. I said earlier that this technology would have everybody living like an immortal billionaire. Well, they don't want, dark-skinned people in India and Africa reaching that same level, of prosperity as the white power holders. I think that's part of it. It's ultimately about this, multi-$100 trillion top-down macroeconomic system. These energy systems that are powering these UFOs would be the end of coal, oil, gas, solar overnight. In one of the films I released recently, The Lost Century, we talk about how in 1971 or 72, there was a national secrecy order slapped on solar panels that were more than 20% efficient, right? So the government said, these are a threat to national security, right? And now 50 some odd years later, that secrecy order is still in place. And you cannot get a solar panel that's more than like 22.5% efficient.
What?
Right? So, so in 50 years, the technology has not evolved. Well, of course it has evolved, but
we just don't have it.
It's all classified,
Yeah.
right? So if they're doing that with solar panels,
Yeah.
what do you think they're going to do with magical alien technology? Right? It's all about maintaining the current power structure.
Right. When you know the history of free energy suppression in the country, you can start to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And is there 3,000 or 9,000 patents? They would just scoop them up and,
Yeah, it's like it's over 5,000, I think.
Yeah.
That 1992 Department of Defense policy planning guidance document, it opened with the phrase, this is the American century, right? Well, where does that phrase come from, right? It comes from Henry Luce, who was the publisher of Time magazine I'd have to check the year. I think it was 1939. I'd have to check. He published an op-ed in Time magazine called The American Century. And he basically makes the case that we should allow Hitler to conquer Europe and become the bulwark against Bolshevism. That was the case that was being made, right? And then fast forward to 2000, you have the Project for a New American Century, which is, the same neocon assholes that we know and love, Donald Rumsfeld and all those guys, right? And they published their vision for foreign policy. This was the document that was really famous for saying, well, we need a new Pearl Harbor, right, to sort of galvanize public support for the foreign policies that we'd like to see happen. That same document calls for the creation of the Space Force, right? So to answer your question, you're just dealing with power-hungry authoritarian fascists, and they put it in their own writing.
Right.
Now, do you think all this information that's coming out right now, because I know all of this is like tied together and it's a lot for people to be like, oh, our government's been lying to us for a very long time, and like all the information that's been coming out, why do you think that people aren't paying attention to it as much as they should be?
So there's a war on attention, baby.
Yeah.
We don't have an ignorance problem. We have an attention problem.
Yeah, we do.
Look around you. Look at all the see a billboard, see a magazine, see a logo on a t-shirt. I mean, there's a war for attention. Even us, look, we're fucking smacking our logo all over the screen, right? I mean, would you not agree that we have an attention problem?
I mean, I certainly have an attention problem.
Squirrel.
Yeah.
Same.
But yeah, I mean, that's been the biggest wake-up call is like, one day someone will make the most realistic sci-fi film of all time, which is when aliens land and no one gives a fuck, because that's what happened. No one gives a shit.
It's the Scorsese commercial at the Super Bowl, right?
Right.
That's what it was all about.
Yeah. My buddy Daniel, who I think you're going to have on the show, he teaches at USC. He teaches screenwriting, and he asked his class, how many of you are aware that there's, congressional hearings happening right now on UFOs, and not a single hand went up, and he was just shocked that like, yeah, no one cares.
But is it they don't care, or is it just too much information coming from all over different areas that they're not able to
Like people don't
focus?
know what to believe anymore.
Yeah, that's true. Nobody knows what to believe.
It's that. It's I think people are just sort of fatigued. We know the majority of people believe in UFOs. They just don't think it's important. It's like, well, I'm great. Yeah, okay, there's aliens. I'm trying to put food on the table for my kids.
Yeah.
I'm trying to, pay for college or
Right.
whatever. So what I've been trying to do is communicate why it's the most important thing that will impact every aspect of our lives. Because again, we should be living in a Star Trek society, and it's been stolen from us.
And I think that's where we should go with this in terms of why this is important. Because there's two sort of phenomenons, two moments that changed things for me. One, when I was operating a bit more like a skeptic, and I was doing research in 2016 for the John Mack project, when I would sit down with people that didn't believe in it, and they would say the likelihood that in all of infinity these beings would be like bipedal humanoid is so infinitesimal. The one aliens that contact us, they said there's no way it's true. This depiction of these beings is accurate. So when I would go back to the abductees or the people who have experienced alien abduction syndrome, they would say that bit of that point of view should let you know exactly our relationship to them. And when I heard that, I was like, oh shit, this changes everything. This rewrites the history books. This rewrites the scriptures. This changes everything. So our relationship to them, can you talk a little bit about that? Anything in your finding in your research, are you finding anything that points to us having a relationship to them pre-existing, that this is not they've just, sort of started to take interest in us and spy on us, that this is a long-standing phenomenon?
Yeah, of course. I mean, virtually every culture on Earth has an origin story about receiving their customs and traditions and wisdom from the star people. Many of these have been preserved. A lot of them haven't. But if you go back far enough, it's always there. It's always very consistent. You have probably millions of people experiencing contact across the world. There are thousands that we know about who have shared their experience. And the messages are always the same. It's always stop messing around with nuclear weapons. take care of your planet because you're on the verge of ecological collapse, and learn to love one another, and develop your consciousness. Which for me, that kind of rules out this being demonic, which now we're hearing a lot of the alt-right guys and the Daily Wire guys starting to talk about UFOs, but saying it's all a demonic thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why would demons tell you to take care of the planet? And
they believe they're pushing occult wisdoms, but we're talking about psychedelic medicines. That's occult wisdom. I mean, pretty much anything that falls outside of the major religions was viewed as a cult. So why do you think that essentially you can call it the alt-right, or who people are starting to perceive this as demonic? And do you think that's something within the government that has been happening as well because of maybe a Christian orthodoxy that a lot of the people in the government have?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is like orchestrated, like, the CIA's out there trying to, put the message out, or if this is sort of happening organically. It's probably just happening organically because you don't need a conspiracy when human nature will answer the question just fine. And so you have people like Jim Semivan, who was the head of covert operations domestic for the CIA, which is a position that should not exist because the CIA is not supposed to have any domestic operations.
Right.
But he has told people in the UFO community, who I will not name, he has told them, this is demonic. Don't meditate. Don't do CE5 because that's when you open yourself up to possession and whatever else. And I think he probably sincerely believes that, I mean, the national security state is filled with evangelical Christians and actually Mormons are way overrepresented. Yeah.
Tucker Carlson, I saw recently that he's one of the few people I see speaking out on the celestial nature of the phenomenon. I believe he went on Rogan and Sean Ryan's show. And, I mean, one thing we could do right now is, because so far we've talked a lot about the negative, the conspiracy, the cover-ups, is start to talk about the positive. And because we do believe that it's celestial in nature, for lack of a better term, we have the personal experiences to back it up, and although it was very startling to, and scary, it was, very positive and healing. There are experiences that healed us. And I guess that's sort of where I would like to take all of this, is to talk about how we can see that the protocol they have put in place by how they are choosing to interact with us so far, it really shows their hand on how ethical they are, because we've fired at them historically. Look at something like Battle LA, that famous photo with, however many rounds of railgun ammunition, and they show like Gandhian level restraint. Yeah. And I always like to compare it to like a wounded dog in the street, and we're the wounded dog, right? If you take a dog in from the street and he's rabid, you stick him in a room and, because he'll bite you if you get too close to him, and you take some food and you bring it in and you put it close to him, right? As close as you can get. You let him be for a while. You get a little bit closer, a little bit closer, a little bit closer. And I feel like that's what they're doing with us. They make themselves known, they move away, they let us deal with it. But do you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
It's like,
so Danny Sheehan tells a story or an analogy, a parable, I don't know what the word is, to answer this beautifully, right? Which is, he tells the story of a little boy whose passion was to collect butterflies. And what he coveted most in the world was a monarch butterfly. And so he acquires a cocoon and he waits for it to hatch. And one day it begins to hatch and the butterfly is emerging. And its foot is caught on a little thread. So the little boy gets some scissors, cuts the thread, and he had a perfect specimen of a monarch butterfly. Only it could not fly. because the muscles that it would have developed by freeing itself from that thread are the muscles it needed to fly. And so this is, in the same way, the moral muscles that we are going to develop, the moral and spiritual muscles that it will take to solve all of the problems on this planet, the hatred, the war, the greed, that is what is going to make us worthy of a seat at the intergalactic federation, and so we have to, they understand that we have to do this ourselves. They can't solve these problems for us. They can't, how many bazillions of Earth-like civilizations have made it and how many have failed? These ETs have seen this millions of times. So they know the extent to which they can safely intervene. And so my understanding is that the only scenario in which they will intervene is full out extinction level events like nuclear war.
Yeah. It does seem like when they come into our atmosphere, it's almost like they're trying to get us to use our own free will to ask more questions.
Yeah.
To be like, wait, that's not us. So who is that? What is that? What does that mean? And that's what it feels like to me every time because we've seen UFOs and we've done the CE5 experiments out in the
thanks to you.
the desert. Yeah, thanks to you, Mazzola.
Have you ever read the Sumerian origin story? Have you gotten into it? Have you read Stanchion's translation?
I have not.
Good for you. It's going to be hard for me to recount this. My dieta brain is making me...
Oh, I know. My brain is not functioning properly today. No caffeine.
Yeah, no caffeine, no nothing. So it's interesting to apply it to what's happening now, and obviously it's a mythology, but, the Sumerian origin story is the oldest recorded story we have, and it's it has the Great Flood, the Tower of Babel, and the Genesis all come from the Sumerian origin story. And, to encapsulate it, the interesting part I want to bring in right now, everyone I'm sure has heard by now, it's essentially their version is their gods come from another planet and create humans as a slave species. It's a big political thing in the myth. It's about that they mix their DNA with, I guess, the DNA of an animal on Earth. And, it's highly politicized. They ultimately start to have sex with us. They create demigods. It becomes a whole fucking thing, but it becomes a disaster. We essentially overpopulate. We're just like fucking and jerking off in the streets and like throwing our shit at each other. It's a shit show, literally. And they ultimately decide, they know some sort of flood is going to happen, and they decide not to intervene. They leave, if I'm remembering this correctly. They don't intervene. They leave, and it ends with them. The whole story ends with them being like, oh, we violated their free will, and we can never do that ever again. And that's how their creation myth ends. The whole thesis statement of the story is about violating humanity's free will and how they cannot do that no matter what again, even though we are of them and we are their creation, allegedly. So, but when you apply it to what's happening and just as a thought experiment, it's like, okay, so that starts to explain what's going on. They're obviously, we need to use our free will to reach back out. Do you know what I'm saying?
Totally. Yeah. I find that totally plausible. When you get into the Zachariah Sitchin stuff with like, oh, they came for our gold or our water, that's where you lose me, because a civilization that can transdimensionally 3D print anything that it needs, like a Star Trek replicator. They don't need to invade a planet to steal gold.
It reads like bad science fiction.
Yeah.
When you read it. Yeah. And there's a lot of people that argue the translation, but I just think it's interesting when it just brings an interesting conversation around free will, and around like are there governing laws to Earth, whatever this is, Earth School, and are there protocols of, how they can, interact with us? Because another reason I'd say that is because contact is not exactly what you see on the news. We know people who are, have contact experiences. It's obvious, which is on a personal level. Like, there's mass contact, which is sort of what we're talking about, but we know individually people are being contacted. They've been contacted for, I guess, since the beginning of time.
Yeah, it can happen in many different ways also, I guess, probably depending on the individual or what the, extraterrestrial or interdimensional being needs at that point. But
Right. And that's a good question. So do you think it's extra dimensional or it's extraplanetary or what?
Yes.
both.
Yeah. So, and also I think I think some of these are us from the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because
that's my pops thinks.
yeah. So it's all of the above. But so in order to be interstellar, you have to also be interdimensional. Because if you're millions of light years away, you're going to have to bend the fabric of space-time in order to travel, or even just to send a communication.
Yeah.
Speed of light communication will take millions of years to send back and forth. So you have to be able to travel interdimensionally. That doesn't mean that they originate from another dimension, right? Then there are the creatures that originate from another dimension. Some of these can be quite scary. And then you have the time travelers. And then you have the ETs who are here on Earth, which no one really talks about. But, there's a reason why if you like doing CE5, which for those who don't know, it's when you meditate or send an intention to have contact, and then more often than not, something shows up, and sometimes some really crazy shit goes down.
We've done it, and we had fucking
We had
orbs in the sky.
We had a giant flash in the sky.
With a group of people, multiple times
Yeah.
we've done it.
Yeah.
Millions of people are doing this around the world. Just Google it. You'll see some crazy shit. But there's a reason people go to certain hot spots like Mount Shasta, Joshua Tree, places like that. It's because there are ET bases under Mount Shasta and Joshua Tree and these other places.
Our experiences have been in Joshua Tree.
Yeah, can we talk? Can we talk about the? Because I never get to talk about this with anyone. On the planet, because there's a lot of ancient stories and different, wisdom traditions about, like I'm thinking about the ant people. Take it. What is the deal? And I know there's all these UFOs or UAPs going into the water or going, mountains opening up, doors opening up, like things like that. So have you seen any credible evidence that they're already here, essentially?
I've seen credible evidence that they are here, and that they have a presence on Earth. My favorite UFO official government document was actually submitted to the FBI on the same day as the original Roswell field report, and it basically says it's like the best explanation of the phenomenon ever, and this is 1947, and it says these are not excarnate Earth people, but they come from their own world. But it's not a planet the way we would think of a planet. It's an etheric planet that interpenetrates our own. And then they will change their vibratory rate to enter our dimension and to leave our dimension. And they can do this at will. Right?
It says this.
It says this. It's on the FBI website. It's in the vault. Yeah. So it's amazing.
Totally makes sense.
No one's talking about this?
No, well, I'm talking about it.
Thanks, Mr.
We're
White.
talking about it right now.
Yeah. No, this is the most amazing document. So, so think about that. They come from an etheric planet that interpenetrates our own.
So it like overlaps our planet, and they can change their vibration and.
Yeah, it's like Earth in another dimension.
Wild.
So that's why when you see like UFOs going in and out of the water, and there's there's no like latency when they hit the water or whatever, you know. It's because they're just slightly out of phase with our dimension, you know. So when I say there's ET bases, I don't think if we went and dug under Mount Shasta, we would find it, you know. And maybe we would. How the fuck would I know? But my hunch is that we wouldn't, right? Because it is out of phase with our dimension.
See, this makes sense why when people do psychedelics, right? So psychedelics are supposed to raise your vibration. So that's when you can have a lot of these experiences, is because, or if you're meditating or whatever, because you're raising your vibration in order to meet theirs. So then you actually can have that sort of experience. That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
I have not heard that before.
Yeah, I'll send you the documents so you guys can put it up.
Please do.
It's fucking crazy, yeah.
We'll put like the link to it or something under their YouTube video. That's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, now you get into the real shit, which is just sort of like the nature of reality, and that like our consciousness is like almost like a radio dial, you know, and we can tune into higher dimensions of reality, and they can tune into our reality. I think something her and me always joke about is because when we'll have like, I don't know, a ceremonial experience and you're interfacing with something, you know, they're always sort of like, we're you. Like, no, we're you. So we always joke like, you know, what if we're just, you know, our highest self already exists in some form, and it's just reaching back to heal the trauma that is us right at this very moment, you know? And what if that's all it is? You know, what if that is just, it's us from the future coming back to help get us through this part of the journey? You know, I mean, like, you know, what if it's all just that simple? I mean, we also like to, you know, obviously we'll throw shit against the wall when we talk about this. You know, we're like, if this is a fucking simulation, like, what if they're just the fucking, you know, like the janitors coming in and like tweaking things, and we're just like, look at them.
But I do like what you were saying, how it's a bunch of
masters.
different things. It's like interdimensional, it's time travelers, it's all these different things. It totally makes sense.
Yeah. But you know, when I say ET, I mean from another planet in our dimension with the ability to traverse the dimensions. Otherwise they wouldn't be able to get here. Yeah. I try to use that like technically when I say ET. When I say alien, that could be, you know, it could be anything. Yeah. You know, that could be something from Lockheed Skunk Works, you know.
What's the greatest physical evidence you've ever come across in all of your research and studies and everything?
How about the fucking dead alien we unveiled at the Mondrian that no one gave a fuck about? How about that? Yeah.
Okay, cool. I was hoping you'd talk about it.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about? Can you
tell us about
what you've excavated?
Oh yeah, sure. So
we should have opened
just
by
a little
about
thing.
this.
We didn't know that we could talk about it.
Oh, absolutely.
She told me you weren't
I
allowed
thought we weren't allowed to.
Tanya, I
was told I wasn't allowed to talk about it.
Talk about
Which,
it.
by the way, before we even go any further, that's how fucked up all this is that whatever you're getting in the media, you're like, can we talk about this?
Yes.
Are we allowed to?
Most of the time, it's like, I don't know if you can talk about this.
Apparently, the answer is yes. Tell us.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So September of last year, there was a super viral story. We could throw the picture up. There's a Mexican journalist named Jaime Maussan, 60 Minutes of Mexico, legendary dude. He brought these two dead alien-looking things in front of the Mexican Senate, and everyone had a good laugh and went super viral. And everyone was hitting me up and asking me, like, is it real? Is it fake? I'm like, you know, how would I know, right? Like leaders in the UFO field, who I was going to ask them if it's real. They're asking me because there was pressure on them to make a public statement. So my buddy Serena DC and I went down to Mexico in January.
Whoop, shout out Serena. Whoop, whoop.
Shout out to Serena. And so I'm sitting in Jaime's office. They were very nice. They actually brought the two bodies to the office for us to see. It's right in front of me. And my friends back in LA are texting me stories that are breaking that day, right? And there were dozens of them from all the major news outlets saying, it's all bullshit. The Peruvian Ministry of Culture has confiscated the bodies, and did extensive DNA testing, and it's just chicken bones and glue. There's nothing to see here.
I've read that.
And there's a picture of the bodies that they confiscated, and they're wearing like dresses and sombreros, and it's the stupidest shit ever, right? So I'm looking at the article, and then I'm looking at the actual bodies that are in front of me, and I'm like, okay, number one, if you confiscated the bodies, then how the fuck are they right in front of me, right? And then number two, this is clearly not the same thing. Right?
Clearly.
Like I'm looking at the pictures and looking at the bodies, and this is not the same thing.
Wow.
So then I'm introduced to a guy named Dr. Jose Zalce, who was he's a lieutenant colonel in the Mexican Navy. He was the head of all health research and development for the Mexican Navy, an expert in DNA forensics, forensic anthropology, forensic dentistry.
Wow.
He was saying these are real. They're 1,000 years old. They were not assembled. We don't know what they are. It's about 70. The DNA shows that about 70% of this is a genetic hybrid of humans, chimps, and bonobos. And there were clear indications in the DNA that these had been engineered.
So
right?
genetically manipulated.
Genetically manipulated.
1,000 years ago.
1,000 years ago. So who was doing that, right? Also, one of them was pregnant with eggs in her belly. And with a breastplate that was like perfectly surgically implanted, made of metals like osmium, which humans didn't even know about until the 20th century, right?
Wow.
So this was strange. And then they were like, hey, we're going to go to Peru because there's some new bodies and you can film us taking possession of the new bodies. So we're like, yeah, cool, let's do that. So we went to Peru. And I'll give you some images that you can throw up. And we saw just the most incredible. It looks like something out of a Hollywood movie.
How many bodies are there?
There are supposedly a few dozen, but these are being dug up by a grave robber who's just been selling them to Russian oligarchs on the black market. Right, so there's this frantic effort to try to acquire these and preserve them. So some of them are at the University of Ica in Peru, where they've been extensively studied, but they're calling on international scientists to participate in studying these. And so we did a press conference at the Mondrian Hotel in West Hollywood. It was a complete shit show. There were all these technical,
we were there, yeah.
But we had like a bunch of news outlets there, Fox and others. Nobody ended up covering it.
There were tons of
Crazy.
news outlets. There were so many. I was surprised when I came in. I was like, oh my God, this is huge.
Yeah, not a single story ran.
What?
And
That's what I mean.
Why do you think?
Well, I think partly because the technical difficulties with the translation was irritating, but they were there for 3 hours. They filmed for 3 hours. They had press kits. I know from one journalist who was there, who I won't name, he was very excited to write a story, and his editor killed it because the editor said everyone knows these are fake.
Oh, God.
So that's the edit. The propaganda has been so effective, right? Speaking of the fake ones, while we were in Peru, we met the guy who made the fake doll, the fake replica, right? Which the Ministry of Culture confiscated, that was wearing the dress and the hat.
What did he have to say about this?
So he made it to sell it to tourists. He was trying to capitalize on tourism, right? In his town, which is Palpa, which is next to Nazca. Everyone calls these the Nazca alien mummies. They're actually found in Palpa, but no one's ever heard of Palpa, which is why everyone calls it Nazca. So he's like, oh, we're going to put Palpa on the map, And so he made these. And when the Ministry of Culture confiscated it, he told them, he said, no, this is a work of art. I made this. This is not the real thing. They ignored that, right? And then claimed they did DNA testing on it and then said it's all fake, right? So a couple of weeks after our press conference, there was another press conference in Lima, in Peru, and we had American scientists, extremely esteemed forensic scientists come out. They examined the bodies. They said publicly at this press conference, we don't know what these things are, but they're not constructed, right? Because that's always the criticism, is that somebody assembled these from, human mummies and a llama skull and whatever, and that's not the case, right? I mean, the joints show the wear and tear you'd expect to see on a body that walked around and used the skeleton. There's absolutely no indications of manipulation.
And they're preserved in like diatomaceous earth and stuff, right?
Yeah, so they're amazingly well preserved because they were preserved in diatomaceous earth in a cave. So they've got organs, brain matter, skin
Wild.
intact. I mean, whoever buried these things knew exactly what they were doing, right? So at that press conference in Lima, the Peruvian Ministry of Culture actually showed up and raided the press conference. And you can see the footage. It's fucking crazy. Like it's these old ladies with clipboards coming in and saying, we're shutting this down. And they're trying to pull the microphone away from the Peruvian journalists and the American scientists who are there. I mean, these people are so stupid, like they've been trying to kill this story for so long. And then they're like, you know what will finally make this story die? Let's raid the press conference in front of the international press. That's what they did.
Can you tell us a little bit about Jaime Maussan's involvement? Because isn't he like the Walter Cronkite of Mexico? Doesn't he host 60 Minutes and he backed the
did,
story?
Yeah.
Wasn't he discredited for backing the story?
Oh yeah. I mean, Jaime has taken nothing but shit for this story, and he everyone calls him a hoaxer. If you read any article about this, they'll say known hoaxer Jaime Maussan. The dude was the face of 60 Minutes in Mexico. He's been a journalist longer than I've been alive. He's broken thousands of stories. A few of those stories turned out to be incorrect. That doesn't mean he's deliberately misleading journalists.
Yeah, that's what he does.
I mean, isn't that the point?
But anyone who gets involved in telling these kinds of stories is held to an impossible standard.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the mainstream media. All they do is fucking lie about everything, right? But if you make one mistake, talking about UFOs, you're a hoaxer, you're a liar, whatever.
Didn't he win a lawsuit for this?
So Jaime is suing the Ministry of Culture in Peru for $300 million for running a misinformation and smear campaign. Because
Good for him.
Yeah. And so he won a default judgment because basically they had no defense and they didn't even respond. Right. So now there's probably going to be, now it's moving on to like the next level of appeal or whatever, but he won the first round.
What I'd love for you to talk, because I mean, there's so many questions I have about this, but I feel like there's a greater, like, can you speak to how people, whistleblowers and people that try to come out with paradigm shifting information, how they are attacked and the techniques that are used against them, so people can be a little bit more aware that if someone is, challenging the establishment, like what's going to happen, and how this goes down. I mean, you've been a victim of it yourself. Yeah.
I mean, the most annoying thing, even though I opened this interview by saying I have so much empathy for skeptics. Well, where I kind of lose patience is when they're like, well, if this was real, we'd have whistleblowers. It's like, bitch, we have so many fucking whistleblowers for the UFO programs. We have so many. Google the Disclosure Project. I mean, there's this conversation that I had probably 200 times when I was trying to convince skeptics. And it always went like this. I'd say, okay, hypothetically, what would convince you? What if, hypothetically, we had an astronaut who walked on the moon, who came forward and said, it's real, the government's covering it up, and they're in possession of ET craft and dead bodies? What if, hypothetically, a bunch of intelligence and military and FAA officials held a press conference in Washington, D.C., and admitted to participating in a UFO cover-up? What if, hypothetically, of course, the CIA published thousands of pages of documents on their website outlining the whole phenomenon? Would that convince you? And invariably, the skeptic would say, well, yeah, of course, if that happened, I'd be convinced. And I'd say, great, because all of those things have happened. Let me show you. And then they always say, oh, no, that doesn't prove anything, right?
What is keeping skeptics from believing? Do you think it's just because it's a complete shift of reality?
Yeah, it goes back to, what I was saying earlier about challenging their identity and that fear of, oh, I'm going to have to become one of these crazy people and whatever. But to answer your question, like going back to those people who participated in the Disclosure Project, and even Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who's the astronaut who's the sixth man to walk on the moon, who you can pull up the video clip of him saying UFOs are real, they're visiting Earth. We have shot them down. We have their craft. We have their technology. We've got dead bodies in our possession. Like he says it that clearly. Let's roll the tape.
Wow.
These people, the ones who were lucky, experience just unimaginable ridicule, social opprobrium. Just had their legacies destroyed, lost their income, and then. The ones who are not so lucky get harassed and intimidated, or they get killed. And David Grush just testified under oath in front of Congress that people have been murdered to keep this a secret.
Right. And this is how we first bonded, because we bonded over John Mack, right? We've talked about on the show, Harvard psychiatrist, head of psychiatry at Harvard, the most acclaimed academic to ever back the alien abduction phenomenon or alien abduction syndrome, and he had his career destroyed. You and me were always fascinated by what would make these people sacrifice everything. We all are doing it here. We all have jobs. We work in certain corporate machines where this could be looked down upon. I think that we are sort of past the point of no return when it comes to aliens and psychedelics. But it's horrible. It's horrible. So many people, they are like the modern heretics, and that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with, heresy. And there is a cultural orthodoxy, and if you question it, you don't get to sit at the table, or we kill you. Either one of those,
Yeah.
I think a good place to end this is on like the most breaking thing, which talking about the tridactyl beings that you excavated. So, because that is like a smoking gun, and I know it's like, if nobody will give it the time of the day, I know that's the main problem right now, but what is your plan to, get past the smear campaign that's been run against you guys?
So, right now we're editing a documentary, and because that's the only thing I know how to do is make documentaries. So we're going to put that out, and hopefully, by telling the whole story with all of the context and showing like, okay, where did the fake replicas come from, and what is the actual research that's been done, and who are what is the pedigree of scientists who are actually, putting their names on the line. I think that we'll be able to counter a lot of the damage that's been done. But, I'm not holding my breath, because there's, catastrophic disclosure is happening right now in Latin America, right? And most of the, American UFO community thinks it's fake, right? Let alone people who are not part of the UFO community, right? So it's going to be really an uphill battle. I'm not losing any sleep over it. Like, I'm going to make my film, put it out, whatever happens, happens. Yeah.
Isn't it crazy? The greatest cover up in the history of the world has been proven true in real time, and it is also paralleling the rise in sort of this assault on conspiratorial thinking, counterculture thinking, independent media. You know what I'm saying? Is that a coincidence, or is that just because the revolution is happening through independent media that, that's why that's why there's so much defamation happening when it comes to, all these alternative outlets and independent, filmmakers like yourself?
I don't think it's completely a coincidence. I think it's unfortunate that we have to turn to a lot of platforms that are not great to because they're the only ones who will cover this stuff. It's why it's so awesome that what we're doing with this platform.
Baby. That's right.
Yeah.
And that's the truth, and that's why we're doing it. Being within the machine, working for these big studio giants, and I've read Project Mockingbird. I've been on the lookout to see if there's fucking CIA ops and as executives, and I've never really seen that, but not that I would know, but to me it's like you said before, like, why do you need a conspiracy when just like human frailty could explain it all? And it's very simple. It's like in Hollywood, there's this game of mimesis. It's mimetics. It's an organism will mimic its environment to enhance its chance of survival. Everybody is, they're a slave to their job, and they're trying to move up the corporate ladder, and they don't want to be fired, and they can barely pay their bills, and they just want to blend in. They want to be a part of the club. They do not want to challenge the status quo. And one of the interesting things, specifically when it comes to mainstream media in Hollywood, is genre boxes are pretty fascinating. Genre boxes are created because essentially they are repeatable. What they are is financial algorithms for art, for media content. So, if, that's a horror genre, we know that this is going to ensure our investment X number, right? So the point is that if you try to touch any of these concepts or ideas outside of the genre box, it's very, very difficult. And especially when it comes to if you want to bring a higher purpose or value into the conversation, that's where it gets real messy, because it's a safer investment to prey on that reptilian brain, on the fear, on sex, on those lower faculties of the human mind. If you want to start talking about, like, I don't know, like the collective evolution of consciousness to reach higher dimensional planes of existence, I mean, like, no, Warner Brothers executive is going to be like, yeah, that's good. That sounds financially like a good business model. Yeah, man. So that's why we made this. We said, how do you have conversations that instead of pandering to the lowest common denominator, we can pander to the highest potential, human evolution, or the highest ideals of the human spirit.
And it's the same thing that Mazzola does with all of his work.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Well, I'll leave you guys with this. If you look at the ancient yoga traditions, and the Eastern saints and the Catholic saints, you see the same sort of phenomena emerging. So all these traditions say that as you purify yourself spiritually, there are these abilities that you will start to develop, right? Levitation, teleportation, dematerialization, bilocation, which is when you're in two locations at once, telepathy. Well, what are UFOs doing? They're levitating. They're levitating, they're teleporting, they're dematerializing, they're bilocating, and they're communicating telepathically with people.
Yes.
So I think that these are civilizations that are millions of years more spiritually evolved beyond us. They have all developed these spiritual abilities, which in the Hindu and Vedic tradition they call it the siddhas, right? Yes. These civilizations have all developed these, and now these abilities are manifesting technologically, right? Which is why, like, when these crash retrieval guys go and shoot down a UFO and then bring it back, and they look at the metal under a microscope, it's so pure that we couldn't replicate it even in a vacuum in space, because it wasn't assembled on a Ford assembly line on another planet the way we would build an airplane or a car. They're literally manifesting these craft into existence, right? through these consciousness technology interfaces.
Yep.
And so these atoms are coming into this dimension and organizing around this sort of consciousness blueprint, right?
Yep.
And that's why the metals are so pure, right? And there's a lot of examples of this that when you start to understand the consciousness piece, a lot of the weirder things about the phenomenon start to make sense.
100%.
And so that's really the key to investigating this stuff. Don't get stuck on, oh, there's a machine in the sky. We really should be asking these deeper questions about, who is inside, what their relationship is to us, what is our relationship to the cosmos. When these ETs say, we are you, well, do they literally mean, well, we're you in the future? Or are they saying that from an enlightened perspective of, well, we are you because we're all one, we're all part of the same conscious quantum hologram,
Yep.
right? Like, they have to understand the true spiritual nature of reality in order for their technology to even work the way that it does.
Yeah.
And so I'm only interested in the UFO phenomenon to the extent that it leads to those kinds of conversations. And, and that's why I'm very skeptical of the controlled disclosure narrative, the, disclosure brought to you by Pfizer, because it's not going to incorporate any of that. That's just about preserving the status quo and corporate control.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank
you so much.
Yes. Please tell us how, if anyone wants to find you or follow you, any work you want to direct them to.
I am only on Twitter or X.
Don't hit him up on that. It's not healthy for him.
What do you mean?
And Mazzola, also just thank you for being a part of Ask for Squares, man. I mean, like, you are a partner here. We love you, and like, yeah, man. I mean,
we can do this without you.
We're gonna do some amazing
so
things
much.
together. Let's go onward and upward. I guess we could say bye to everybody listening. Bye.